This is the Ontario Parliament Television Network.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Government Agencies Committee. And this afternoon we will be hearing from deputants on the agency review for the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. All right, our next presenter, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance, and David Lepofsky, the Human Rights Reform Representative. Good afternoon, Mr. Lepofsky. As you will know from the earlier deputants, we have 30 minutes set aside, and you will have the opportunity to make comments in that time, and whatever remains will be divided amongst the caucus. So please begin when you're ready.
Okay. Good afternoon, members. My name is Orville Endicott, and it falls to me to introduce to you our main presenter this afternoon, David Lepofsky, and also our other colleague, Leslie MacDonald. If I may just say a word about myself first, I'm not part of the leadership of the AODA Alliance, but I am one of the architects of it. And when I say a few words about Mr. Lepofsky, you'll get a sense of the history of how the AODA Alliance came into being. My other colleague is Leslie MacDonald, who's the National Coordinator of Accessible Design Services for the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. And she has, with the blessing of CNIB, made her skills available to the coalition, to the AODA Alliance for its work. Now, David Lepofsky, who is going to be presenting to you today, he's a graduate with honors from Osgoode Hall Law School and went on to do a Master of Laws at Harvard Law School in the early 1980s. Even before that, he was very active in a volunteer capacity and continues to this day to be a volunteer advocating for reforms to the law that will secure better rights for people with disabilities. He was one of the most articulate and persuasive voices that gave us in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms the guarantee of equality for persons with disabilities. He had the same impact here in this province and with respect to the inclusion of protections against discrimination on the grounds of disability in the Ontario Human Rights Code. If I were questioning him, I might ask him how long is it going to take him to get Canada to ratify the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was passed at the UN and signed by Canada more than 2 years ago. From beginning in the mid-1990s, David was the organizer and driving force in the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee. And that committee achieved through the Conservative government in the 1990s the Ontarians with Disabilities Act 2001. And then, of course, he went on to ensure that we have the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the AODA, passed in 2005. Whenever I ride on the Toronto Transit Commission subways or buses, I can't help thinking of David, because I take advantage, just like people with visual impairments do, of the very clear and timely announcement of every stop. It's a very dulcet and clear voice that I hear, but it's really David Lepofsky's voice, which you will hear in just a minute. David was the recipient of, well, I left out that we would not be hearing that voice had David not successfully gone to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, first to ensure that the TTC would announce subway stops, and then a little while later that they would announce all bus and streetcar stops. David received the Order of Canada in 1995, the Order of Ontario in 2007, and too many honors for me to list. He is a prolific author, both of published and unpublished documents, one of which you have before you today, and he is the Human Rights Reform Representative for the AODA Alliance. David.
Thank you, Orville. It's an honor to be able to appear before you. You have a brief before you that we've submitted. I know this hearing is being televised. If anybody else wants to get a copy of our brief, we'd be delighted to email it to them. They need simply send a request to AODAfeedback@rogers.com. We're honored to be here, particularly because we wanted to make these points about 2.5 years ago at standing committee hearings on Bill 107, which we were promised, which the government scheduled, which the government advertised, and which the government, over the commendable opposition of the opposition, canceled through an unprecedented closure motion to muzzle public debate on human rights reform. I regret that what we are here to do today is to tell you what we were trying to warn you of three years ago, and which unfortunately appears to be coming true as a result of the government's changes to the Human Rights Tribunal and the related agencies it works with. The coalition with which I have the privilege of serving is made up of individuals and organizations like Orville and Leslie who some 30 years ago came to this building to fight to get disability included, discrimination because of disability, into the Human Rights Code. We were delighted to win 2 rights back in 1982. First was a legal ban on discrimination in workplace and access to goods and services and housing and the like based on disability. But that wasn't the only right we won. The second right we won was a legal guarantee that our human rights would be publicly investigated and publicly prosecuted by a public law enforcement agency called the Human Rights Tribunal. As long as the complaint was within their jurisdiction, not trivial, and incapable of being settled, their job was to investigate it and, where appropriate, to litigate it. Those were 2 important rights that we won. In the 90s, we united as a disability community to fight for and win the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, a new law to build on, not replace, the Human Rights Code. We're here today to draw your attention to the promises that the government made in 2006 when it decided to pass Bill 107 to privatize the enforcement of human rights, and to demonstrate through the government's own data by those responsible for implementing this law that those promises have sadly not been kept.